Welcome to a new daily top Askreddit video. Today's topic: what are some of the greatest feuds in history? In 1962, a wealthy Italian businessman arranged a meeting with Enzo Ferrari to discuss his displeasure with the famous luxury sports cars. His chief complaint was that the clutches didn't seem to hold up well. Ferrari responded, "The clutch is not the problem. The problem is you don't know how to drive a Ferrari and you break the clutch." The businessman, who founded and owned a successful tractor manufacturer, knew a thing or two about vehicles. He was incensed at the reply, and not only promised to never buy another Ferrari, but to begin building his own supercars to show Ferrari how it was done. And today, the cars of Ferruccio Lamborghini are famous worldwide. And don't forget about the time Enzo Ferrari met with an American businessman to close the deal on the sale of Ferrari, only to back out because Enzo thought that the American didn't know shit about racing. Well, the American got so pissed his company spent the next couple years developing a race car that would absolutely dominate and embarrass Ferrari at the most prestigious race in the world for 4 straight years. Cheers to Enzo Ferrari, the asshole that inspired greatness in others. The Ford GT40. BTW Lamborghini was doubly incensed when he had his own car stripped down to see what the problem was with the clutch. He found out that they were not made by Ferrari but bought from an outside manufacturer and almost identical in model and maker to the ones Lamborghini used for his tractors. Except Ferrari were charging 5 times the price for replacing it. Tolkien was in negotiations to sell The Hobbit in Germany. The Nazis were in power, but World War II hadn't started yet. The German publisher asked him to provide proof that he was Aryan. This was his response, with emphasis by me. July 25, 1938. 20 Orthmoor Road, Oxford. Dear Sirs. Thank you for your letter. I regret that I am not clear as to what you intend by a risk. I am not of Aryan extraction, that is Indo-Iranian. As far as I am aware, none of my ancestors spoke Hindustani, Persian, Gypsy, or any related dialects. But if I am to understand that you are equirig whether I am of Jewish origin, I can only reply that I regret that I appear to have no ancestors of that gifted people. My great-great-grandfather came to England in the 18th century from Germany. The main part of my descent is therefore purely English, and I am an English subject, which should be sufficient. I have been accustomed, nonetheless, to regard my German name with pride, and continued to do so throughout the period of the late regrettable war, in which I served in the English army. I cannot, however, forbear to comment that if impertinent and irrelevant inquiries of this sort are to become the rule in matters of literature, then the time is not far distant when a German name will no longer be a source of pride. Your equery is doubtless made in order to comply with the laws of your own country, but that this should be held to apply to the subjects of another state would be improper, even if it had, as it has not, any bearing whatsoever on the merits of my work or its sustainability for publication, of which you appear to have satisfied yourselves without reference to my abstamag. I trust you will find this reply satisfactory, and remain yours faithfully. J. R. Tolkien. That is by far the most eloquent fuck you I have ever read. Definitely, there's no competition really after this. No idea how accurate this scene was, but in the movie Chaplin there's a pre-WW2 scene where some Nazi douche is talking to Chaplin and some others at a party or something. Chaplin mentioned he didn't like Nazis. The German said, "What do you have against us?" To which Chaplin said, "What do you have against everybody else?" Then somebody else helpfully explained that Chaplin is a Jew, and that's why he's upset. Chaplin looks the German dead in the face and says, "No, I'm sorry. I don't have that honor." Chaplin was also a raging archo-socialist, another group the Nazis hated with a passion. https://wikipedia.org/wiki/Charlie_Chaplin. Nazis, are you Aryan? Tolkien, noted linguistics freak, are you? You keep using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means. Joan of Arc's trial was known to be tedious as the church tried their hardest to find grounds for a conviction. In an attempt to trick her, she was asked whether she knew if she was in God's grace. Since the church believed no one was able to know if they were truly in God's grace, either a yes or no could be condemnable. She responded by saying, "If I am not, may God put me there, and if I am, may God so keep me." Reports on the trial say that the court was stupefied by her deft answer. It was basically a mic drop in the face of the church at the hands of what they saw as an illiterate and heretic farm girl. Joan of Arc is one of the craziest historical stories out there. The ending is obviously sad, though. She was ultimately put to death for wearing pants. She wore pants since she was in prison with other men who were trying to rape her. This was probably another setup like the one in your comment. She really is. I feel like most people don't know even a fraction of the extent of her story, and I wish it was more well known, honestly. I've had a fascination with her since I was a freshman in high school. One of my favorite facts about her is how she jumped out of the 70-foot tower she was kept prisoner in and survived with only very minor injuries because her voices told her she would be okay. Now I don't claim to know what exactly was going on with her, and I'm not even a religious person, but her strong convictions and determination have been an inspiration to me ever since I first learned about her. Does God like you? I hope so. Fuck. I've always been fond of the exchange between John Montagu and John Wilkes, both British politicians in the 18th century. Montagu was also the 4th Earl of Sandwich, the namesake and possibly inventor of the sandwich. During one of their many verbal battles, Montagu reportedly spat at Wilkes and said, "Upon my soul, Wilkes, I do not know whether you will die on the gallows or of the pox." Wilkes replied, "That depends, my lord, on whether I embrace your principles or your mistress." Winston Churchill had a contentious relationship with Lady Aestia. She said once, "If you were my husband, I'd give you poison." Churchill, "If I were your husband, I'd drink it." Or to Bessie Braddock, "Winston, you're drunk. Yes, and you're ugly. But I shall be sober in the morning." Bette Davis, who had a decades-long feud with Joan Crawford that lasted right up to the bitter end, was quoted upon first hearing of her rival's death. "You should never say bad things about the dead, you should only say good. Joan Crawford is dead." Good. If you haven't yet, watch Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. It is a spectacular film featuring two women who despised each other. Bette Davis camps it up fabulously, especially in the bank teller scene. Joan Crawford learned Bette Davis had a mad crush on the actor Frickett Tone. Crawford invited Tone to her house for lunch and was waiting for him naked. They married. If I remember correctly, one also dragged the other by her hair for real in that film. When France was invaded during WW2, they cut the lines to the elevator up the Eiffel Tower, so when the Nazis went to put their flag on it, they had to take the stairs all the way up. Surprise. It's leg day, ya bastards. When France fell, the staff of the Eiffel Tower were told to get the lights working so the tower would be a beacon of the Nazis' victory. The staff dragged their feet, citing electrical faults, broken parts, unavailable tools, etc. They kept it up for 6 years. The staff did such a good job of documenting their ineptitude that to this day there's no way to tell if it was deliberate or not. Except that the French had the Eiffel Tower lit up within hours of Germany's surrender. They had been working on it for a long time. Edit, y'all really need to stop upvoting me on Reddit now. My virginity will be restored at this rate. Oh, what a surprise it was that loose bulb preventing the other lights from working. That's less of a fuck you and more of a normal French reaction to being interrupted having a pleasant time. Minnesota took a flag from Virginia during the Battle of Gettysburg in the American Civil War. Since then, Virginia keeps asking for it back, saying that it's their heritage. This is my favorite rebuttal. In 2000, when Virginia legislators requested the Southern Cross flag once again, Government Jesse Ventura said, "Why? We won. We took it. That makes it our heritage." They have it on display at the Capitol building. It's a neat bit of history. Apparently not. According to Wikipedia, it's kept in a drawer of the Minnesota Historical Society for security reasons. I'm from Virginia, I support Minnesota keeping it. Just one big fuck you to Virginia. Minnesota loves pissing off people by being passive-aggressive. The charge of the first Minnesota is also a big fuck you to the Confederates, as the charge likely single-handedly saved Gettysburg. The man who was responsible for the Union winning at Gettysburg was a man named John Buford, who commanded the cavalry scouting force that preceded Med's army. Buford's scout force came off the high ground, that would eventually form the Union position, and encountered the Confederate vanguard in the low ground. This was interesting, because he encountered infantry, not cavalry. Fighters, not scouts. This meant Lee was marching blind, and he was right, Stuart was running amok elsewhere instead of doing his job. That meant Lee had no idea where the Union army was. Now the armies of the time marched from place to place in a long column that follows the road network. But to fight, they have to line up in formation, line abreast, and that takes time and space. No gunpowder army goes from march column formation to line abreast fighting formation instantly. Buford realized that if he had his men dismount and hide their horses, then form up like infantry, he would look like the leading edge of the Union army. This would force the Confederates to deploy in the low ground, assuming that the Union was already on the high ground. But if he stayed mounted, Lee would know that the main body was still some way behind, because scouts are well ahead of the main body, so he would press up the ridge and deploy on the best piece of ground for miles around. And as well, Meade had only taken command a couple of days earlier. He was something of an unknown entity, where the guy he replaced was a bit of an idiot. By forcing the Confederates to deploy, when Meade arrived, time and space would force him to deploy in response on the best piece of ground for miles around. Buford could force the fight to happen in a place that was maximally advantageous for the Union Army. So he did. He dismounted his men, formed them up like infantry, and hid the horses. Then when the Confederates reached his position, opened fire. And exactly as predicted, the Confederate army deployed into the low ground. The Union army arrived and deployed on the high ground, and for 3 days Lee battered his army to death on that position. Once Buford made that call, it was all over except the fighting. I can understand Lee's first attempt at the right flank that got very close to winning before it was repulsed. And I can understand his attempt at the left flank, through Devil's Den and the Round Tops. But the third attempt, right up the middle, was pure lunacy.